I'm a homeowner, and my house, it's about 80 years old. So that means when something breaks, it's usually not up to code and a lot more expensive to replace. For example, a simple replacement of a dishwasher could mean having to rewire the circuit or reroute the plumbing. The thing is, you use these fixtures and appliances every day, and you don't think about them very much because they're functioning, they work, until something breaks. This is probably a tortured analogy for the OT systems that we're talking about, but it works. You generally take these systems for granted. You don't necessarily think about all the specific devices until something bad happens. The problem here is that in a well-functioning system, there could be hundreds, if not thousands, of specific devices. And maybe you have a record of what each device is. You know, make, model, serial number. But the devices themselves, they can have additional flavors to them, such as unique voltage requirements to be determined by the installer in the moment, and not recorded later. So, you look at the network traffic, it'll tell you only so much about each device. And realistically, it's too expensive to go out in the field and physically look at each device. So what do? Well, there's one set of researchers that's currently building a library of all the cyber-physical devices and their unique features from a specific vendor. The point is to have that library and to eliminate the guesswork. And in a moment, I'll introduce you to one of those researchers. This is a story about building a cyber-physical system device library and how that might seem simple, when in reality, it's not. I'm Robert Famosi. This is Error Code.
I'm Sean Tufts. I'm a field CTO for Claroty. Claroty is a CPS cybersecurity tool. So we are 10 years old and we know assets in the OT theater better than anyone else. We make our life researching PLCs and trying to surround them with the best security program possible.
So Claroty just came out with this cool report on its ongoing effort to identify all these OT devices in your network. Some of those devices might come from a brand name, yet deep inside they're white-labeled, meaning you don't necessarily know who originally manufactured that device. Meaning your network can be really complicated at the end of the day. Most of the time, it's not a front-burner issue, but over time, how do you know what to update and when? Well, we'll start with a very simple analogy.
Think about next time you go to the airport, think about everything that has to go right from the moment you put your bag on the baggage claim system to when it gets to the plane, to when it gets to the new city, to when it gets off and gets to your little shuttle-y thing. And then secondly, think of how many different stakeholders are a part of that. You've got automation system vendors, you've got construction people, you've got a guy driving a truck that has to make sure the bag stays on the back of the truck. You've got, in many cases, a city and county or even a mayor or governor that has the final authority for the facility. And then you've got all the airlines that have their own pieces, parts, scanning guns, all those kind of things. That ecosystem is very delicate. And when a bag gets from one place to another, I'm always amazed, but it always gets there. And that's another area where if it's not broke, don't touch it. Let's just leave those systems alone and surround them with the best security possible. And we can do that best when we know what these assets are in very great detail. And we can do that now better than we did last month, which I think is pretty cool.
I think this analogy frames our discussion well. In our world today, so many things have to go right, and so many little things have to go right. That includes all those internet-connected devices, the vast pool of OT technologies.
This report specifically came out of Team 82, which is our research division out of Tel Aviv. They are a group of reverse engineers that just love tinkering with devices. I found a wind turbine the other day in our platform, And I started talking to them about what I would expect to see from a wind turbine in a platform. And they were like jumping up and down, ready to go do research and find all the pieces and parts to it. It's a really cool group of guys that are very mission focused. Not guys, there's a female in there. They're very mission focused and really are interested in securing our Earth's worth of PLC equipment that's out there and relatively insecure.
So Sean identified a problem, which I think we've all known about, but we don't really talk much about. And that is that there are PLCs out in the field in use every day that do not match the specs, do not match what is expected in terms of their name or their vendor, or how they're referred to, or whatever. And if I understand correctly, that becomes a problem when you go to patch a vulnerability, because you do a reference. How many of those systems do you have?
The growth we've had is actually quite strong. So going back kind of 10 years ago, before we were even a company, we were doing this work based on pulling old POs from 20 years ago, pulling someone out of a field. One of my first cyber jobs was a flip phone on an oil rig, taking pictures of assets and then putting them in a spreadsheet. We've evolved and we've gotten to the point where now we can get the full theater of assets in the world, but we are running into challenges where the asset itself doesn't know what it is. So finding out some of that details and how we can tune that correctly and how we can partner with our automation vendors to get that pencil as finely sharpened as we can is going to be our next challenge for the next 4 to 5 years, where we can really get this right.
So stepping back a bit, if I understand correctly, Claroty is building a library of these PLCs and other devices.
For now, we're really focused on using the tool inside of our system so we can give our current clients the best possible inventory out there. I don't know where it'll go, and I think we don't know where it'll go. What we want to do is make sure we, as I said earlier, that pencil really sharp, and that's the goal right now, is to make sure we can get that there. Maybe this becomes something bigger that we give to a research institution. I don't really know, because it is very valuable data. And when you think about the problem a lot of our OEM partners have, the Rockwells, the Schneiders, the GEs, the way we did inventory 10 years ago, or 20 or 30, which some of our assets that are still in the field are running, there was a lot different approaches that we took to do their own inventory, their own product catalogs. And those things have evolved 4 to 5 times. The problem is none of them are in an individual position to be an independent party to host all that data. So there really hasn't been someone like us step up to make this kind of a commitment until now. So when you ask where it goes, I don't know. Currently, you've got to be kind of under the Claroty umbrella to unlock this tool. But the ones that are using it in that scale, we're really saving a lot of time, which is an interesting component.
So in doing the census, if you will, of devices, is Sean picking a particular vendor and then going through all of their products? Or is he going about in a given client from multiple vendors?
Let me start with how we work with clients before the library. Our tool does, at its core function, and we've evolved on 4 or 5 different ways to do it better. At its core function, we're sniffing the network. We're seeing the traffic as it goes between the PLC and an HMI, and an HMI and its Windows machines above it, and then up into the broader internet, however far it can go. When we sniff that packet, we get to see what the device is, what it's talking to, what it wants to be, and then we start to profile it. So currently, we get a really good sweep of the environment. We start to see all the assets. We have a bucket called Lost and Found, where that is our bucket where we are spending our manual time and attention to fine tune it. In some areas, in some industries or clients, that bucket's bigger, and some it's very small. But it is ended up being a lot of people's research time. Number one, at the automation vendor, because we're asking them questions. Number two, from our clients, because they want 100% inventory and we want to give it to them. And then so number three is our asset teams. So we're spending time changing a digit back and forth on a model number, seeing if that matches better than another. Because the way these things communicate broadly, they don't bring that data with them, unfortunately.
So that's interesting. So Sean's saying that in the communications that they don't often identify themselves what the source is that they're coming from. so you can't track it back to a specific model or device. You just know that it's on your network somewhere and that data is moving around.
And what we're talking about here is the minutia, right? Because we know we can get to a Siemens PLC and we know we can see exactly what it is. The really hard part comes at the time of installation. So if you can imagine a guy at a, a cheese factory, at a nuclear power plant, at a distribution center, at an airport, he's got a truck full of equipment and he needs to get this stuff working. So he's running out left and right, pulling different things in, finding out what's different, putting a new piece of equipment in, seeing if that works. Oh, we have a different voltage spike we need to handle. There's not always a lot of great documentation that comes along with that. And things like voltage is a good example because there is a varying degree inside of our products that make a big difference when we start talking about a whole factory's worth and then the larger CVE ecosystem. The vulnerability database produces great data, phenomenal data. It's one of the most valuable things in all of cyber, let alone OT. They can't catch that minutia that we can see. And now that we've got collaboration with the OEM partners, we're going to continue to focus that so that we don't have an error on a small component of a very important system.
So that brings up an interesting point. With the National Vulnerabilities Database, is that with hardware, it's not always capturing the minutia that's necessary.
Yeah, it needs to know the minutia. So there are certain, and we've seen this in the wild, and it's published in our study, areas where a vulnerability does not apply to the same make and model based on the individual schematics of it. And the kind of details we're looking for, and I've got an image up of just a Siemens PLC and what they exists on their barcode. So on the back of the barcode, they've got I don't know what the word stands for. It's in German, but ultimately it's the machine readable product designation. This is Siemens specific, and they are a partner of ours, and they're a good partner. On the actual components you could put in, it's the drive type, it's make, model, serial number. All those we know and we've been working with for a long time. But then you get into protection rating, and that means can you spray a power washer at this machine? And there's different ratings for different qualifications. You then get into filtering types, voltage ratings, and those can go up from like 200 volts to 240, 560, 600 volts. Now we have power multipliers. I don't know what that means. We have power ratings. We have the frame size of the actual chassis and where the chassis would fit. We've got, and a couple other designations. So when we talk about this minutia, we're talking about that. That technician might swap out a different voltage, a 220 for a whatever, and no one will ever know. And the CVE database needs that information. It doesn't always have it. There are portions of that SKU that are going to change the vulnerability impact based on what we actually put in the field.
So Sean brings up a good point. If you have a device and it has a certain criteria that you've identified, but the installer has the ability to change, say, the voltage setting, which makes it, in theory, a different device, a vulnerability may not affect it as much as something that has a lower power rating, for example.
And there are certainly attributes and there's certainly devices that are more modern or devices our software is better tuned for. There's certainly a wide range of quality there. But one of the good stats from the report was around we had a big automation family where we were able to see about 4% of the quality information we are looking for. Upon receiving the data files from the OEM vendor, we jumped to 83%. So we had the make, model, serial number, but it wasn't very helpful information. We had that huge delta because of the partnership with the OEM community, them giving us more schematics, more data, more intelligence, and we jumped that high on a very specific automation family, which I think is really important and an effort we need to continue.
So in this report, Sean mentions that they took a delta and gave it to an AI. I'm wondering if he could talk a little bit more about that process and what he was hoping to accomplish.
It's a big data set with a lot of complex individual nuances that are really important. And we got to fine tune. What was the actual number in the report? It's something like, 17 million assets. That's what we looked at. And we're trying to find the back end of every single decimal point of those 17 million assets. So we did leverage an AI to compute all the data we could see from our platform And that's where we started to really see the pickup. I mean, from a manual process, which we've been doing in the last 10 years, it's been great. But now we're supersizing that thing and really putting the world's best analytic engine on top of it to bring forth that minutia into something that's usable.
The Claroty report focuses a lot on medical. Are there verticals that they're drilling down into first, or it just happened to be that this was a representative customer that they wanted to highlight?
Medical is a big portion of our company. We have a huge medical branch that's doing a lot of critical work in HDOs inside of hospitals. And those automation vendors, those device makers, they saw the issue a little more fine-tuned, right? Because they're talking about a conveyor belt is a critical system, obviously, not belittling that. Talking about a device connected to a patient, those hospital teams want to be absolutely sure that we're getting the best information out into the world. So they were really good early partners. GE Healthcare, Siemens Healthcare, those were very, very motivated entities that wanted our help and were willing to come to the table and spend their time, energy, and intellectual property to help us.
So is there anything that these partner vendors can be doing better going forward? We already have a lot of devices in the field, billions of devices in the field. But are they taking steps today, going forward, being more careful about how they identify the chatty minutia, as we called it earlier?
The time savings is actually most at the automation vendor's desk, actually. So what we found in working with the groups that have opted in, their teams are overrun by questions around, is this patch applicable to this device? We talked about our internal research team, right? But those are the teams that are actually seeing the biggest time savings because they go from, I'm just making up a number, 800 tickets a month. If we can do this correctly, we can drop that number down to a very small figure. And now the conversations can move faster because we know more data. So in theory, the best time saving should be at the automation vendor's desk.
So we've already talked about healthcare. Are there other verticals? Are there other vendors that have been included in this?
We've directed most people in the company to reach out to automation vendors. I've gone back to all my former employers and said, hey, we need this data. Can you help us? And also pitching that it'll help you save time. But yeah, and if this podcast can be a beacon for that, if you make a physical product in the physical world and want to make sure that you've got the best security on those devices, please reach out to Claroty. Reach out to me, Sean Tufts. I'm on LinkedIn, pretty easy to find. We're looking for more collaboration there. And the more we can get, the better we're going to be.
So they're making their best guess as to what the actual device is out in the field, and then they're patching them, remediating them, and bringing them up to whatever security that it needs to be for that particular device.
And the treatment here, vulnerability management and patch management in OT is probably one of the most difficult issues facing cybersecurity today. The outcome is not always clear. In IT, we rank stack all the CVEs 10 to 1. On Monday, we move through the 10s. On Tuesday, we move through the 9s. And then once we get there, we rescan and start over again. It's not what we do in OT. In OT, it's a much, much longer process where you really have to understand what the device is. Is a patch even available? Or is by going down this path a rebuild of a whole factory? Real cases. So you really have to be a lot more wise about where you push your patch management investments. We need to understand the criticality. We need to understand the applicability of a patch. We need to understand compensating controls, and we need to understand overall cost. If we can put all that into a soup, it will help guide us on what are the easiest things to do that actually reduce risk. There are some devices we're not going to touch for another decade, which means we need a big bad firewall in front of it. We need the best protection technologies around these devices. And we're not going to get there. And most of our critical infrastructure is still running on Windows XP. Until we go rebuild those networks, we're going to be stuck with Clippy on our operating systems. And that's just a reality. So when I say it's the hardest thing we do inside of cyber, I think that's a good illustration of the challenges we face. So taking this back to the CPS library, if we can know what the device is very intimately, then we can provide a better recommendation path, which could be one of 10 different outcomes for that.
And so this includes the inability to take action because the device is so old.
Now, let's go through that inability piece because that's the point where we got to start talking to our lawyer friends and saying, and really having a lot of CYA activity. Hey, we found this device. It's got this piece. We're choosing to treat the risk in this fashion, and here's why. This is a business decision that we've made, and here's our outcome, and here's our compensating controls. I encourage a lot of our CISO and vulnerability management patch people to have a good communication path with their legal office because this is a big issue. And if you don't do that CYA piece, people could really point fingers on a bad day. And that's the worst time to be pointing fingers. You really want to be solving the problem rather than, trying to apply blame, which isn't appropriate.
But to Sean's point, there can be compensating controls. There can be things put in place at the network level. But you first have to identify that situation is before you can make those recommendations.
We had two really good stats that are right up in the key findings. The first one is 88% of our CPS assets don't transmit an actual product code. So what that means is we're looking at that minutia and we have to start sometimes at the bare, what is this? And that's where we have to start. And I think that also highlights the challenge here. So we have clients who, when we step into their world and we plug in for the first time and we start getting their data, we have clients who look at us and say, oh, you have 99% visibility in your network. That's nowhere near good enough. You need to get better. We're questioning this whole relationship and we're like, 99 is pretty good. But we have other clients who have 70% data and they are ecstatic. So I think defining what that goal is and knowing the maturity of the systems, knowing what's in play, knowing what can be done, I think is a really important step for a lot of our operators and a big focus of ours. So I think that was a really valuable finding. The other one that's very related is 76% of these devices transmit product codes that are different. So when we talked earlier, 76% of the time, the thing the guy installed is not the thing that we see on the wire. So we're really spending a lot of time and energy going back and forth to fine tune that. I think I've said the word fine tune at least, 80 times?
So again, the people that are doing the installation, they're setting it up and so forth. And they've got other factors that they're considering at the time, like voltages. How would that device then show up on the network as something different than what was expected if it's broadcasting a standard message like all the other devices around it? I mean, how can an organization even begin to address this? So ballpark, how many devices out there in the field are antiquated, are using really old OS and software? Wow, that's a problem. So these devices, they're just sitting out there and they're vulnerable. And if it's all functioning just fine, there's no compelling business reason to go out there and to start to update or replace these devices.
I think it's maturity. Most of the equipment we're dealing with is a luxury to be less than 10 years old. So there are things that my father installed that we're looking at today, right? Some systems have been in play since the 1980s and they're still there. Product development cycles, even as recently as 5 or 10 years ago, aren't as good as, or weren't as good as they are now. So a lot of times there's just inefficiencies in the build and what they put out there, and a code on the box didn't get the right software application to the right firmware, and then now we've got a cross-talking device that is confusing. It still works. It's still doing what it needs to do. But from a security operator perspective, it's harder to
So
do.
with a ballpark figure, about how many devices are there out in the field that are antiquated?
I know we actually have that number, and we've looked up end of life, end of sale, and those kind of activities, and how much of our fleet of 17 million CPS devices. I'm pretty sure we have that number. It is significant. It is not a single digit number.
That's a problem. So many devices just sitting there, vulnerable. And it's all functioning just fine. So there's probably no compelling business reason for anyone to go out there and update or replace these devices.
Our industry didn't invent the if it's not broke, don't fix it, but we are owning that thing. We are well invested in that mentality. And there's a very good reason for it. These things are complex to set up. The ecosystem inside a distribution center, getting a package that starts with a click on my website, shooting out into a truck 15 minutes later, that's incredible technology. And being able to stack up these hierarchical systems and make sure those interplays are right is a really, really sensitive job. And that is at a distribution center. Imagine a hospital, imagine a nuclear site, imagine anything in the food and bev world where you've got to be really tight on things like the temperature of milk, temperature of raw chicken. Those pieces and parts are very hard to disrupt once you get them moving. We try really hard in the OT security world to not disrupt our operators' day-to-day job. That's why we've gone through with a lot of the current situation, or the current tool sets we use are very passive in nature. We're not going to break up someone's login credentials and change how they access their systems unless they're very ready for it, and most aren't.
Going back to this idea that changing a single device in a larger ecosystem does have a ripple effect, I know that when patches are created from large software vendors, they need to roll through all the different OS configuration scenarios. And even then, they don't capture everything. Look at Microsoft, for example, or Apple. A large number of possible configurations out in the field, and yet they still have to make those patches available. Hardware isn't quite keeping up with that.
It is a complex world and one that needs to be secured. So that's a lot of our initiative and the reason we're a company. And the more we can do and the more our peers can do and the more we can partner with automation vendors and the more we can partner with our clients, we're going to get a lot better. And we're already on that path. It's pretty fun. It's an interesting cyberspace to be in, for sure.
I'd really like to thank Sean for coming on the show and discussing his team's effort to build a library of cyber-physical devices to help in the discovery of what's on your network. It would be really cool if that library could someday be shared and made available for all. Hey, if you're enjoying Error Code, tell a friend. I'm sure there are other people out there who like narrative information security podcasts. And I'd really like to hear from you. Go to errorcodepodcast.com to get more details. And tell me what you like, and even what you don't. I've got some great episodes coming up. We'll have more on Volt Typhoon, Salt Typhoon, and hacking utilities supply chains. Subscribe today. I don't want you to miss out.